Back again here, Garrett Roche with Mr. John Parker and Ms. Victoria Signorelli. Apologies to the viewers once again, as there was another issue with the camera, but what was funny and ironic is as soon as the camera turned off, due to it being a fairly new camera of my own, I may need to adjust a setting on it. Mr. Parker received a phone call inquiring about his book. But we'll return to where we left off, which was discussing about the date of birth on Evegenia, aka allegedly Anastasia's grave, etc.
So anyway, the date of birth on Evgenia's grave is the date of birth of Anastasia Romanov. And this grave is a sanctified Orthodox grave. We even recently celebrated a panikida, a requiem for the dead at that grave. The name was used, Evegenia Smetisko, of course, but the date on the cross said Anastasia Romanov. And I have to speak for many of the people that I know there, that when the priest said, we are praying for Evegenia Smetisko, really people understood. We are praying for Anastasia Romanov,
who the Russian Orthodox Church dubbed a saint.
In 1981, and I'm not Orthodox, so any Orthodox viewers, please correct me if I'm wrong for the record, but it's my understanding that in 1981, of course in 1981, the church in Russia was not necessarily on the best of terms with the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, because the Berlin Wall was still there, the Cold War, the communist system was still in place. So that, I lost my train of thought for a second, yes. So the Russian Church in America, outside of Russia that is, canonized the entire family based on the information which they understood at the time to be the very best information that everybody had perished in 1918. And of course, because the Tsar was anointed to protect the church, they are considered, or were considered, martyrs, and hence saintly. Hence we can talk of Saint Tatiana, Saint Nicholas, Saint Alexandra. Of course, nobody knew exactly the state of the remains at that time. My understanding also is that in Russia they're called, that they faced their death in a Christian manner, that they're also saintly, but maybe the terminology in the Russian church gives a little more wiggle room for one or more of the children to have survived. That I don't know. I'm not a theologian. I respect the Orthodox Church. I understand why they canonized the family. But to me, a miracle is a miracle. And what a miracle it would be, because Anastasia comes from the Greek word meaning resurrection. In Greek, we say Christos Anesti, for Easter, Christ is risen. That root is in the name Anastasia. So her name is resurrection. So isn't that something that if we find out soon that Evegenia Smetisko is really Anastasia, it's a kind of resurrection. She's coming back
in a way,
from the dead. Yes.
What gets me is also that on in a set, in the Orthodox Church where she's buried, they use Anastasia's birthday. That is a special date. That's something that is federal, that is state. That's something that you can't play around with. You can't change those dates around. You have to have proof.
By the same token, that's a very good point. I never thought about that.
That's exactly right.
That maybe, I'm saying maybe, I'm speculating, the governmental powers that be did know her identity, hence on her grave goes the actual date rather than the fictitious date.
Mhm.
Because another question that I have is, why would the church put the birthday of a saint on the grave of someone who they reject as being the saint? That's what we call a conundrum.
Yes.
That is a strange,
Well said, John.
a
Excellent point.
strange fact. I said, this is Saint so-and-so, and you put the birth date of that saint, it makes sense. But you say, you know, Miss McGillicuddy from wherever and has the saint's birthday of so-and-so when it's not, that's sort of odd.
Yes.
So it's odd that the birth date of a saint is on the tomb of a woman who was rejected as being the person who was sainted. So these things, that's interesting about maybe there's a governmental reality.
It has to be, because when I
Understanding.
buried my parents, I needed proof. I had to submit proof to the funeral parlor, all the different things. They needed maybe 3 different proofs of identity. I couldn't just say, oh yeah, my parents died this day and this day. I needed proof.
I did call North Kingstown, Rhode Island, attempting to locate a death certificate for Evegenia Smetisko, and I was not able to do it because it had to be a close relative asking for it. I would recommend, if anybody in the Romanov family is listening to this today, and is the closest relative as we can get to Anastasia, that they may want to call the North Kingstown, Rhode Island Town Hall and see if they can get their hands on the death certificate. Because my question is there a discrepancy between the date of birth? The date of death is the date of death,
Right.
but the date of birth on the grave and the date of birth given on the death certificate.
Yes.
Yes.
In either case, whether it is or it isn't, there's a story to uncover, a story that we need to know, or that I'm sure we are going to know. Eventually, we are going to know that.
Well, it brings it right back to the executor of the will.
Yes.
They would have to have that information. They would have to have her birth certificate. They would have to have all this information because it is legal. It is illegal.
I should think so.
Yes. Otherwise, they won't be able to do anything. They have to prove her identity. They have to prove everything.
Although I do not have contact, per se, to anybody in our government, or the Russian government, or even the Danish government, I have contacted the U.S. Embassy in Russia, the Russian Embassy in Washington, the Russian Mission to the United Nations, the Danish Embassy in Germany, the Danish Royal House via Facebook. The previous entities that I mentioned, I contacted them via Twitter a number of times. They must have received it. Also,
The Kremlin.
The Kremlin, yes, the Moscow Times, Peterhof, and the Hermitage Museum,
That's right.
and also more recently, because she is a relative, Queen Margrethe of Denmark, and who may be of great assistance. Your Majesty, if you're listening to this, this would be something for not only Danish history, but world history,
Yes.
Christian history,
That's right.
and family history.
And you received your tweet from the Lebanese prince recently as well.
Yes, Prince Garrett Roche is aware of it also, which I'm very happy to say. So people are starting to discover, although some people who are Romanov experts, and I'm not taking that away from them, I think
No.
they do know their business very, very well, or well versed, have stated, either directly or indirectly, no, that's not true. Evegenia cannot be. But For every time somebody says, it cannot be, I say, it certainly can be, and apparently is.
Well, the
I'm very
mystery-
much like yourself there, John.
Yes, but the
Inquisitive.
mystery is constantly going. If this was shut, cut off, that was it. But why does it keep going? And this is the 100th anniversary of their murder.
Yes.
Why does the mystery keep going if everybody has all this information saying this is what it is? Why does everybody still have doubts?
Why has the patriarch, Kirill, God bless him, not made a definitive declaration as yet? Why are people waiting and people asking themselves, why are we waiting? The church is very, very cautious because the church is aware. The church in Russia, the church in America are now have very, very good relations with one another. Anything that happens here is known there. We may not be privy to what's going on, but they certainly do know. And I do want to go back to, if I may,
Yes,
go
yeah.
back to Corin Hall's To Free the Romanovs. Again, one of the very best books I have ever read. First of all, because I'm an amateur genealogist. I love genealogy, and it's jam-packed with information about the relationships of all of the royal families in Europe and how they were interrelated, cousins, nephews, nieces, grandparents, one of the other. And Miss Hall does bring up that there is still doubt. And if I just may quote a few of her, on page 259 in the postscript, she says that Robert Ingram, the young aide-de-camp who looked after the Dowager Empress and her family in Malta in 1919, also knew something. When interviewed, he was unable to talk about it. He had signed the official Secrets Act of 1919. I believe that is to be revealed later this year, and this is September of 2018 when we are taping this. If you see this film next year, there may be more information beyond that point. He did sign that. Another paragraph I'd like to quote from Miss Hall. On the 16th of September 1918, in an official report sent to Mr. Alston in Vladivostok, Thomas Preston also said that surviving members had been moved. He stated that after the Tsar's murder, the rest of the members of the imperial family were taken away to an unknown destination. There is still the possibility of them having been taken north by the Bolsheviks in their retreat to Verkhotri. Not that that is any definitive proof of anything, but that there were even then, at that time, officials of some renown and import who believed that some people had survived. And one last quote, if you would indulge me with this.
Yes, go ahead.
Page 260. When interviewed in the 1970s, Thomas Preston, by now Sir Thomas, said that relevant documents were being withheld. Then, in an interview conducted in 1987, after Preston's death, his widow and sister-in-law suddenly stated that he had been summoned to the Ipatiev house early on the morning of 17 July as an official witness to view the family's corpses. However, the bodies of two of the Tsar's daughters were not there. Anastasia and, he thought, Tatiana. And we're going to talk about that, Vicky, because we read something also. Some authors have tried to tie this in with Richard Meinert-Hagen's account of a rescue attempt prompted by King George V, with, quote, one child being literally thrown into a plane at Ekaterinburg. Senior intelligence officers, including Stephen Alley, were later quoted as saying that one or more of the Romanovs had been saved. And so it's not that we are inventing this story out of nothing, that there is historical precedent for thinking that maybe
Yes.
Anastasia and somebody else did survive. And that Official Secrets Act, I believe, is to be revealed this year.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
Which should open up a lot of information.
do you remember in the memoirs section of the book about Tatiana, what Alexander says? Alexander, by the way, excuse me, is
Yes.
the name given to the man who rescued Evegenia / Anastasia. And as she gets better and regains her strength, she is compelled to ask him information which she really doesn't want to know, but she feels that she needs to know as the surviving member of the family. And would you like to jump in there, Vicki?
Yes, yeah, and it's very very interesting because how she was found by Alexander or by his associates. That had her sister, when she asked him, had her sister survived? He said, if she didn't move or something like that, if she wasn't tall enough or something, it had something to do with her, and that could have been Tatiana.
In fact, he asks her, did you have a sister who was taller than
Yes.
you? Very pretty, I don't know what other adjectives he uses, and she says, yes, it's Tatiana. She understood that it was Tatiana, and he says, it's a pity,
Yes.
because she sat up and screamed, and then he doesn't tell her anything more. But it's pretty evident that she was finished off, and that he regrets that he too would have been able to save her had she not screamed. And here we are reading in this corroborative work that they thought it was Tatiana who also had survived. So there we have her memoirs written before 1963, but published in 1963, republished now by me with annotations in somebody else's account from that time.
Yes, and it's always been one of those mysteries. Had two survived? What
Sure.
if the other children survived?
Exactly.
Alexei, your
Yes.
question on
Yes.
the possibility of Alexei.
I haven't researched Alexei as much as I would like to, mainly because I don't speak Russian, and many things that have been written about a possible survivor, a claimant, are in Russian, but there is a good book out in English about a man named Vitaly Filatov. I have nothing to go on, except that I would like to speak to at this moment in public, but that his case is worth investigating.
Yes.
And I believe he lived in Astrakhan, if I'm pronouncing that right, and his son wrote a book, came out a number of years ago, not too many years ago, about his father, and being Alexei. One thing he did mention, which I think is worth mentioning, is that many people said it's impossible that Alexei could have lived because he had hemophilia, he never would have lived anyway, would have bled to death. But remember, we're talking about the Victorian or Edwardian understanding of what is hemophilia is not what we understand as hemophilia and a host of other blood disorders today. It was sort of an umbrella term used.
Oh,
So
Yes.
what they thought of it, what we think of as hemophilia today, we're reading it, may not be what we're reading. It may not be that he had hemophilia, but had a blood disorder mimicking in some aspects hemophilia. I just want to say that to his credit, the people who say that's impossible because of hemophilia, I don't think we can use that one definitively as the end-all be-all,
No.
whether he died or did not die. But Vitaly Filatov should be investigated a bit further.
Yes, and also I was reading somewhere, I can't remember where I was reading, they were talking about hemophilia, that they had found out what caused it, and they were able to reverse it in some people.
Amazing.
Interesting.
Not reverse it, but they were able to put something in the blood to help the hemophiliacs. And I can't remember where I read it, but I read it somewhere, and they were saying that that was during, I think, the 60s or the 70s. I can't, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not quoting it, but it had Alexei survived, they would have been able to help him.
I think that once we find a definitive answer for Anastasia, which is coming, that Alexei will follow suit. I think that it's God's plan, however God works, that she be brought forth first, and then all things will follow. And
Yes, many things,
Yes.
including inclusive of history and of current times,
yes,
and just bringing the entire picture together. Many things from history, even it may stem outside of the Romanov family,
Sure.
and up through the present and the future. It may mean just correcting some things from the past, correcting things currently from the future. I mean, right from the current time through the future, and just bringing the entire picture together, and it might really instill much happiness and contentment for the world over.
the family deserves closure.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
no matter what
Yes.
theologians say, what historians say, the first responsibility is to the family. We all deserve to know what happened to our family members. I say this as an amateur genealogist too. I don't want fake news
No.
in my family line. I want to understand even the good, the bad, the ugly. I want to understand it. I think it's the right of each person to fully understand their family for whatever it brings.
Yes.
And if it's easier for some people in authority to say, oh, they're all dead, well, I understand that they may find it easier to say they're all dead. But that is not what people deserve. There are people with greater need and greater right to know who deserve the absolute truth, as close as we can get to the truth. And if this means that the government, the church, historians have to rectify their versions of truth, that's what has to be done, and we'll all be better for it.
And history is always evolving, as we know. It's always evolving. It's not set in stone, because we're still learning more and more and more about our past. Even if it's the bad parts, like you said, the good, the
Certainly.
bad, and the ugly.
Mhm.
It's always evolving. You can't keep it static. It's got to move on.
Absolutely.
You need to bring out the good, the bad, and the ugly to finally have the truth brought out on the table, and just bring it all together, as I say, into one big piece of beautiful for the future.
Absolutely.
Mistakes from the past will not be repeated, therefore, and only the best of the past will be repeated, if the past is to be repeated at all, and only the best draw that in, bring it together with the current and into the future.
Thank you today for this very in-depth discussion. By no means is it full, because there are many, many more aspects which need to be discussed. But I think, if anything, we can bring to the viewer today that if you believe that everything has been said about the Romanovs, and we're just waiting for the church to give its imprimatur,
Yes.
beware, because there's more to come. And as one prelate of the Russian church said recently in an article, expect a miracle. we will be witnessing a miracle, and I'm not even sure what the full scope of that miracle is going to be.
Yeah, it's
But
gonna
just
be-
talking about her today is a miracle.
Yeah, absolutely, and think about that, if Evegenia Smetisko is Anastasia, she would be the original people's princess.
Yes, we think
Not-
of Lady
yes.
Diana, don't we?
Yes, well,
Or
not
even
to,
as the world's princess.
that's right, not to
As
take
John
that away
mentioned to
from,
me personally.
Princess Diana, but she was there long before. And
Mm.
look at her, if she is proved to be Anastasia, look at where she came from. She came from Russia to America.
Mm.
She found sanctity, she found
Solace.
solace, she found protection.
Security.
And security
Yes.
in America. That's, and if she isn't, then she had a really good story.
A really good story which has benefited many people monetarily and as far as
Absolutely, yes.
relics, but this is just the cutting edge right now. We're going to be coming to you again, I am sure, in the future for a follow-up to this program.
We've
And,
only begun, I would say.
Yes, yes.
an hour and a half, and we've only scratched the surface. Right.
John,
Absolutely.
such a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Garrett.
Пожалуйста,
Yeah.
спасибо большое.
Спасибо.
All right.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
And
Adios.
thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Evegenia,
Anastasia.
AKA to possibly be proven Anastasia Romanov.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
До свидания.
До свидания.
Ciao. Arrivederci.